Too heavy. Okay, good, good. Why so?
Like the only way we're feeling introspect about our lives, what we're doing, what we're supposed to be doing.
So do you find that that's what's been happening? So good heavy or bad heavy?
Oh, good heavy.
Good heavy.
Getting you to think how you can change life, you know.
Do you feel like it's kind of a day that's prep for Yom Kippur kind of day, or it's a different type of day? You know what I mean by that? In other words, is it like trying to get everybody to change their course and wake up, slichot kind of preempt, or what else? What is it? No, I'm not saying that it is Yom Kippur. I'm saying kind of like prep you for it. More nationalistic day. I was looking at our people in general. Oh, I like that point. Great. Yeah. Either one.
Kind of a day to organize your thoughts, where you stand on certain things, maybe take things from what people are saying, or if you wanted to, but can actually change your thoughts from days forward.
Do you welcome that?
Yeah.
You do. That's good. Yeah.
A day to self-audit?
Self-audit. So you're looking at it personally, right? Seeing where I'm at and where my life is going. Do you look at it nationalistic? In other words, do you look at it in terms of you and the nation?
In terms of how I play a part in the nation.
How you play a part in the nation. Does anyone else share that at all? Yeah. Some. What do you think? Yeah.
I think it's a chance for me to step out of my comfort zone and try to, move forward.
How's that? Does anyone feel like that's stepping out of the comfort zone at all? You do?
Yeah. Also,
What is it?
it's like a lot of back-to-back classes today, and there's a lot of information being thrown at you.
It's
and
intense.
You just have to realize that after this, there's a lot of processing that you need to do. You need to realize
Decompression.
where you need to take a step back and see everything from
Very good point.
outside.
Very good point. It is. I mean, I was going to ask if you've been here all day, going to everything. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of stuff probably that doesn't necessarily jive exactly with each other, but trying to get it all together. Yeah. Well, I mean, kol hakavod for being here. It's not necessarily first choice, for the day out. Were you gonna say something?
I was gonna say I like the idea of the comfort zone because you are stepping out of your comfort zone. You're stepping out of your daily routine, which is just becomes like rote every day now. And so to step out of your comfort zone and really step back and introspect and see how you fit into the community or how you fit into the Jewish world and what you're doing and everything like that is not what we do on a daily basis or not always.
You're the first person that I've heard in years after say fit into the community, say fit into the Jewish world. I'm just sharing that with you, which I'm very happy to hear. Okay, so I have to say it's impressive to hear, but it's a heavy day. There's no way around that. It is a very heavy day. So what I wanted to share with you, and I really would like to hear your input. So don't feel free to stop me at any time. Normally I'm lecturing and talking at you, but feel free to stop me at any time and to share with me what it is that you're thinking about what I'm talking about. So this is very cursorily related to Tisha B'Av, but it's related nonetheless because you're feeling, as I hear from you, you're talking about a self-audit, you're talking about the nation, you're talking about processing information for your life, how you're going to take it into your life and deal with it, if you will. And so pretty much everybody is saying, whether it's community or the Jewish world, everybody is saying this is a day in where I'm really thinking about what it means to be me and who I am in this world and what my people have said about who I am. Does it hold for me, not hold for me, in what degree, what's changed? So what I wanted to share with you is this, because I think that in my personal experience also, as a Jewish person, this was something, and it is still something that I really have to work through and understand, because I was not raised thinking in these terms. I was raised thinking that I was a Jew. And I never thought about what that word meant. We've got got kibitzers in the back that are dating. So I never really thought about what the word meant. I just thought that it meant that I was Jewish as opposed to non-Jewish. And then I started to think about the word and to think about what we have been called throughout history. And the thing is that we have a very long history, which also doesn't make things easy. We have a very long history. We're going 4,000 years now. If you start from Avraham Avinu. Right? We're going 4 millennia. And I started to think, why wasn't he called a Jew? And then I realized that was ludicrous, because the only reason we're called Jews is because there was a man named Judah. And so we call our name Jew after him. How that happened, we'll see, but that's really how it started. So he wasn't called, a Jew. He was called what?
Hebrew.
An Ivri. So he's an Ivri, and I guess in English that's translated to Hebrew. And he's just a guy. I mean, he's just this man that ends up, his children end up going down to Egypt. But before they go down to Egypt, they get this name Israel. Who gets that name?
Yaakov.
Yaakov. So Yaakov gets his name Israel. The Lord who gives him his name. And the funny thing is that there were other name changes beforehand, but this name change doesn't really stick. Avram, we never call Avram again. We call him Avraham from here on in. And the Hakamim say in the Talmud, not even allowed to call him Avram once his name was changed. It's Avraham. But then Yaakov gets the Israel name, and we keep going back and forth between the names, don't we? We still call him Yaakov Avinu. We don't call Avram Avinu unless you're Ashkenazi. But otherwise, only in this room could I make it. But we don't call him that. We don't call Sarai Imenu. We call it Sarai Imenu. But Yisrael, that one is, interchangeable. It doesn't stick. And there's times where in the Torah you will actually hear him referred to by both names in the same pasuk. So if you want to reference it, go back to Parashat Vayechi where he meets Ephraim and Menashe, his grandkids. Yosef brings the grandkids over to see him before he dies. And in that pasuk, it calls him Yisrael and Yaakov in the same pasuk. So this name, from the very beginning, has been a name that we cannot latch onto. We have real trouble with it till today. So we started, as Israel, B'nai Israel. We don't really call ourselves that very much. For some reason, people like to call us Klal Yisrael instead of B'nai Israel. And the reason why we don't call ourselves B'nai Israel is because B'nai Israel were the actual kids of the man named Israel, which was Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, that whole thing. And they go down as a family to Egypt, not as a nation. They go down as a family to Egypt, 70 people. They end up down there. So they're referred to as B'nai Israel by the Egyptians. And they're always called the children of Israel, the man Israel, who was introduced to Paro, and who they make a really big fuss about, right? Huge fuss in Egypt about this guy for some reason. Yosef is the viceroy for 80 years. Think about that. 80 years, he is second in command to Paro in Egypt. 80. And his father becomes this massive figure when he comes in, so much so that when he dies, they have a huge migration out of Egypt, a state funeral for the man. It's such a massive funeral that everybody around sees what's going on and says, Evil Gadol Mitzrayim. I mean, Egypt has really lost a major figure. It must be. They call the place Avil Mitzrayim because it's such a serious thing. But this is the kids. It's the kids of this Israel man. And they live there for 200 some odd years, according to our tradition. And it's B'nai Israel, and they get out, and then they end up getting into Eretz Israel. Finally, eventually, they get in, and they build a life there. It takes them some time till they can actually establish themselves in a government. It takes them over 300 years, over 3 centuries to get it together. They've got some very strange leaders. They have like Schwarzenegger-type leaders that are ripping gates off of a city on his back, and dragging them with him. They have They have this amazing woman who makes every man around her feel like that they can barely raise their head. She's strong. She calls herself the mother of Israel. There's very interesting leaders that are happening during this time. Again, in perspective, 100 years longer than our country's been around. By our country, I mean the U.S. Don't think that I don't consider it my country just because. 300 years. And then we get Shaul HaMelech. He becomes king of Israel. But the country is not 100% united under him. The Jews have a problem with him, namely the tribe of Judah. The tribe of Judah has a problem with Shaul. They show allegiance, but they don't love him because he's not from there. And Shaul goes, and then we get David. And David, most of his career, 40 years it runs, most of his career as king, he runs trying to get everybody to follow and to connect and to work on actually establishing what we would call the kingdom of Israel, Malchut Yisrael. And he does by the end. He finally gets everybody under and recognizing him and together. And it's the one time really where we have a nation, not a religion, and not a community, a nation of people, sovereign, on our own land, self-governing. We have a justice system. And the system runs in terms of Torah, but the beauty of it is that it is constantly responsive. The Torah is constantly questioned. And it's brought to who? To decide how we're going to understand things. The Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can summon the king to law. Right? This is a very important thing. There's balance, talk about balance of powers. Balance of powers happened all the way back when we had a government in Israel. So the Supreme Court was able to call the king to the court and try him, if necessary. The king would stand for the Kohen Gadol. He was the only man that the king would stand for. He would stand for the Kohen Gadol when he was wearing the Urim V'Tumim. So there was balances of power. But the beautiful thing is that when we were living this way and thriving this way, and we were this nation, very short-lived, 80 years max, of 4,000 years of history, 80 years maximum, where it was running well this way, the Torah was alive. It was responsive to change. So no matter what the pasuk or what the mitzvah in the Torah was, it was always under question. Because there is not one mitzvah in the Torah that comes with an interpretation, does it? Not one. You try anyone. Not one. Every single mitzvah in the Torah, in order to be able to implement, requires interpretation. Something as simple as kabet avicha v'et imecha. Honor your mother and father. Simple. How complicated could that be? Who's your mother? Who's your father? What if you're adopted? Does it apply? What if they abuse you? Does it apply? What's honor? Does it mean standing for them when they come into the room, not sitting in their chair, speaking to them a certain way? How do we explain honor? Right? You can't get off the ground. Cannot get off the ground, not with one mitzvah, without interpretation. And here's the amazing thing. There were certain interpretations that we believe were given over to us at Sinai by Moshe. There are many more that were not. And how did we address those? We brought them to court. And the Supreme Court adjudicated the questions. And it's crazier. It gets even crazier than that. If a Supreme Court of the previous generation understood a pasuk a certain way, and a later generation of the Supreme Court understood it a different way than the previous court, they redefined it and changed it. Did you know that? It's crazy. It's unbelievable. That's how it was. Do you know that we pray for this to come back every single day? Hashiva shofetinu kevarishona v'yotzenu kevatachila. Bring back our judges. And we say, Haser mimenu yagon v'anaha. Take away the agony and despair of living the way that we have to live. That we're stuck. So Tisha B'Av is one of the days that it's a day that deals with that problem. One aspect of the problem. This is just parenthetical, but it's one of the problems of not being a nation and not being sovereign and not having full control over our lives and our Torah. It's hard to even imagine a system like that. Where literally 1 year or 10 years ago, we might have looked at stainless steel pots as requiring koshering for Pesach, and 10 years later they would re-examine stainless steel. Stainless steel is like glass, which I think it is, by the way. Don't take that. Don't take that. Doesn't absorb. The only reason you don't have to kosher glass is because it doesn't absorb. You don't have to kosher glass for Pesach. The best thing to have in a kosher home is a set of glass dishes. Meat, milk, hametz, not hametz, whatever it is, you don't have to kosher it. It's fantastic. Stainless steel, you got to sit and boil and the whole thing. Stainless steel absorbs like glass does. Nobody will tell you that. Because we don't have any guts. For somebody to stand up and say, it's like glass. But this is the bigger problem. Even if somebody did stand up and say it's like glass, there's one guy. It's not the Sanhedrin. It's not the Supreme Court.
So we don't have some form of rabbinical court today?
Some form, that's very broad.
Like, for example, this fat was pushed off, because I would have
Yes.
pushed that. Someone had to decide that.
That's true. They decided that 2,000 years ago. No, really. We do have some form of rabbinical court, but it is a pale, barely recognizable comparison to what it once was. It barely does anything. I don't mean to depress you. I'm simply saying that it doesn't. Right? But this is what it was. So we lose that. We lost that. That's a major issue. But we were Israel. And we were that nation. We were a nation on earth, along with other nations. What do we call non-Jews? We call them goyim. But it doesn't refer to non-Jews. It refers to other nations. The word goy in Hebrew means what? Nation. We call ourselves a goy. Me, goy gadol, asher lo Elohim. We read it just now. Right? So we call ourselves Israel and then the goyim. The goyim are just the other nations in the United Nations. But that's become, to us, non-Jew. It's become a religious term, hasn't it? But we were not a religion to begin with. Yes, we were a people that were sovereign on our land, that were governed by the law of Torah, but the law of Torah was in our hands. And we adjudicated law based on how reality was moving. The Torah tells us, "Ve'halachta el hashofet asher yeh bayamim hahem." Go to the judge that is living in the time that you need him. You can't go to previous judges and rule from previous judges. Rashi says, "En lecha ela hashofet asher beyamecha." The only judge that's relevant to you is the judge that lives in your days. They don't know about your time, those judges that lived beforehand. But that's in a living system. We don't have one. We don't have a living system. We have a fossilized system. And so we do as much in the fossilized system to be able to respond as we can. In the good times. Because when we're doing it well, we respond with whatever we've got in the fossilized system. But we were not first a religion, we were first a nation on earth. With our own home. An address on this planet. Like every other nation. But then things started to fall apart. And without getting too much into a history lesson, the majority of the children of Israel, the tribes, sided with the wrong guy. Who was also a descendant of Yosef, but they sided with the wrong. So 10 tribes seceded from the Union after civil war. And they went with Yerovam ben Nevat, and then the kings that came after him, who was a descendant of Yosef, and 3 tribes. I know you're missing count, but the Levi is not always counted as a tribe, but they have the Menashe and Ephraim are 2, which was originally 1. So 3 tribes, Yehuda, Binyamin, and Levi, stayed. But they were no longer called Israel because they weren't the majority. What were they called? The Jews. Because who was the king? The king came from the tribe of Yehuda. And therefore, all of the people under the reign of the king of Yehuda, who was the son of Shlomo HaMelech, were called Yehudim. And that's where it came from. That's why it was called the Jew. Because the 10 tribes were wiped out. They're gone. We don't have them anymore. 10 of our 12 tribes are no longer with us. We're all that's left. That means if you are not a convert today, you are a Jew biologically all the way back You are either from the tribe of Yehuda, the tribe of Binyamin, or the tribe of Levi. If you are a bona fide Kohen or Levi, then you know which tribe you're from. If not, it's one of the other two. Interestingly, notice how Yehuda and Binyamin always stuck together after that history they had together. Remember their history? Where Yehuda has to stick up for Binyamin? Finally, he sticks up for his kid brother. They stick together throughout all of history. We're still manifest of that act between Yehuda and Binyamin. And where he stands up against Yosef, protects his younger brother, and tells his father, I'm going to protect him. You ask him from my hand, I will make sure that that boy comes back okay. All of us here today are a result of that relationship. All of us are either from Yehuda or Binyamin or from Levi. So we were thrown out, right? We were thrown out. And that's why in the Megillah you will finally find, it's the only place, the first time in all of Tanakh that you find the people called Yehudim. You don't hear Yisrael anywhere, do you? If you think back, you open up the Megillah, all it is La Yehudim Hayta Rav Simcha, was all La Yehudim, La Yehudim, La Yehudim. There's no Yisrael. And guess what? From that time, the name Yisrael went dormant. And we were no longer a nation, really. We lost it. We started to think about ourselves not as a nation, but as a religious sect. Massive difference. Massive. We lost a sense of national sovereignty. 2,000 years ago, we created a religion called Yahdut. And that's how we've been running for 2,000 years. Nobody called us Israel. We didn't call ourselves Israel. We used Goyim, we still use that term, but we didn't use Israel. We called ourselves Jews. Till today, isn't it weird? I mean, it's kind of weird to call ourselves that, wouldn't it? What would we call ourselves? Israelis. But we're not. We don't think of ourselves that way. So for 2,000 years, we ran as a tribal people, and that tribe got split apart more and more and more and more and more, to where not only were we tribal people, we would split into sub-tribes, where the sub-tribes would not even recognize the other tribes, sub-tribes, as Jews. So if you were to imagine your great-great-grandfather in Halab or wherever he might have been, going to Eastern Europe, unless you had a grandfather in Eastern Europe, and if you do have a grandfather both from Halab and Eastern Europe, you are an anomaly. No, you are an anomaly. You would never have happened. Would never have happened in most of Jewish history. It's a miracle that you did happen if you did. Because it means that they found each other, not only find each other, but found some kind of love between each other and were prepared to share their genes. A miracle. I'm not joking. It really is a miracle. Do you understand that even in Europe, the countries wouldn't mix? Hungarian Jews and Polish Jews were not one and the same. In the way that Iraqi Jews and Syrian Jews were not the same. We don't necessarily think about them. They're not the same. Their kibbeh is different. And you know this. It's not the same. And there was a serious problem. We fell apart to such a degree that we no longer even thought about ourselves as Jews. We thought about ourselves as Syrian and Iraqis and Polish and Hungarian and so on and so forth. And secondarily, we think about ourselves as Jews, but what's going on here is an even bigger miracle, and that is that we've come back home. And we have started once again to think about ourselves as a nation. So when you say that, you don't necessarily recognize, although maybe you do, but you don't necessarily recognize the massive weight and the chidush, right? The new aspect of what that means. No Jew thought about them. Do you think that if you went to your great-grandparents and said, you know, we have real problems with the Israeli army, they would look at you and say, what are you talking, what's an Israeli army? What are you, like some Jewish militia? Or a bunch of Jewish kids come together with, you know? No, the Israeli army, we have a country. We have one of the greatest armies in the world. Think for a minute how completely foreign that would sound. Barely even able to wrap their heads around it. To us, it's matter-of-fact daily stuff. Mark Twain was asked what he thought about Dr. Herzl's idea. Dr. Herzl had an idea that the Jews should have a homeland, because he understood that time was running out. Everything was falling apart. This was in the 20s, right? He realized that everything was falling apart and the Jews needed to be able to become a nation again. He had no connection to Torah whatsoever. The only connection that he had to anything was that he was part of this people. And it's odd that Eretz Yisrael, Medina, was built by people that really had no connection to Torah. So Dr. Herzl, of course, proposed this. He worked very hard to be able to try and facilitate this and so on. So Mark Twain hears about this and he says, you know something? I heard about Dr. Herzl's proposal, but I would think it would be politic to stop it. Not a good idea. He says, you know, if you get the most cunning minds on the planet together in one place, it would be like the horse knowing its own strength. We would never ride again. I'm slightly paraphrasing, you can look this up. This is what he said. He was not an anti-Semite. He was just a very matter-of-fact thinker. And what he was saying was, the Jews, if you allow the Jews to be a nation on earth, it's over for us. This is Mark Twain. Hitler realized the same thing. He just had a much more mean streak, a bigger mean streak than Mark Twain. He really wanted to do something about it. But they believed the same. He understood this. To have a nation of Israel on the planet with an address and an army, that's not a good idea. We'd never ride again. And that very much is what it is that we're experiencing today, both on our end and on the end of the Goyim, right, of the other nations. The other nations are finding it a very hard pill to swallow. And every time that Israel does something significant in the world, it makes it much more difficult to swallow, because it only reminds them that, you know, they've been around here a long time, these people. When we called them Jews, it wasn't such a big problem. But then they've come back. We haven't used the word Israel for them for 3,000 years. It makes people uncomfortable, nervous. You understand why? It makes us nervous, on a different kind of nervous, but it makes us nervous. And the reason why I'm sharing it with you in this fashion is because on this day, when we talk about tragedy and breakdown, we're not talking about tragedy and breakdown only of previous communities. We're talking about tragedy and breakdown of being Israel, a sovereign people on our land with a Sanhedrin, living a life responsive and alive in Torah. A nation on earth with strength, with an army, with whatever it takes. That's what we mourn. And it's been such a long time we forget about the fact that that's even part of our history, that it's even who we, any element of who we are. We don't think about that. So I don't think about myself as an Israeli, but I should. Not because I'm Zionistic, because it's what I started as. It's not like there's something new that I'm doing that I didn't have before. That's how we started. So how long, at what point do I stop going back into history to look at my own identity? Isn't there like an arbitrary point that we stop? People say, what kind of Jew are you? You'll say Syrian. Really? That's it? You don't go further back than that? Do we only remember like 1 or 2 generations back, or do we go further back? Do we see ourselves within that context? How far back does our context of identity go? That's really the question. And are we concerned about losing it, and are we interested in getting it back again? So it's really hard for us to think about, because who wants to go back that far? It's really a drag to go back that far, because it bears with it a huge amount of responsibility, doesn't it? Is this making any sense? Agree, disagree?
Agree.
Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. Really, I mean, you know, shoot me down, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I agree or disagree. You made a lot of points, but I would say that a person's context of identity generally goes back as far as that context affects them to this day.
Mhm.
So most people in this room would probably identify as Syrian because that's what affects them most.
Yes.
Whereas if they identified, or if they said they were Judean or something else, or Israeli, that would be an expression of saying, this is what affects me the most. So the question isn't how far back do you have to go, or why don't you go back further? It's why does this affect you, and not other identities that you could have but you don't.
So you're supporting what I'm saying?
I don't know.
You're saying why is
I'm
it
still
that this,
thinking about
why
what you're
is
saying.
it that this affects you and not the other thing? In other words, if I say that I'm looking forward to Mashiach, which is what I'm supposed to say, right? If I say that I'm looking forward to Mashiach, what is that? Some religious idea, or am I looking forward to have a king, to have a nation again, a country, sovereignty, strength? I mean, isn't that what we're looking for? It's what we started as. Does God ever once in the Torah talk about religion? Does he promise Avraham Avinu a Torah? Not saying that Torah is not bad. Torah is essential. It's very, very important, but it's not what's promised to Avraham. What is promised to Avraham?
Nation.
Land. And Yitzhak, land. And Yaakov, more land. And Moshe is hired to take them out of one land and get them into another land. On the way, we should give them some guidelines to help them to live in that land. But it's truncated unless we're in the land in that fashion. So yeah.
I would ask you what you would say to criticism of this idea coming from the angle that we were a nation, and look what, we basically messed it up, and what evolved, like a religion that evolved from it. Why don't we continue, down the religious path and create a universal religion, and not necessarily, some people would view going back to being a nation as sort of going backwards. Where
Really?
we should be, I've heard that. I mean, I don't agree with
No,
it.
no.
Some people would say we should be doing the exact opposite. We shouldn't be separating ourselves more. We should be making Judaism more like Islam, for example, where somebody that's, not Arab, or somebody that is Arab can adopt it just the same, and we should be trying to create this universal tikkun olam type of religion. Why not that? Didn't we mess up being a nation?
Because, well, yeah, okay, so try again. The problem is because religion is superficial. Nationhood is much more fundamental, meaning it gets down to the nature of who I am. Religion is how do I feel or how do I act vis-a-vis God and my life. So I take that wherever I go. But I don't have a place on this earth. I don't. I don't have any place on this earth in where I recognize I have a connection to the earth. So if you think about nationhood and how nations relate, they will talk about their soil. You're born on American soil. Why are you talking about soil? What's the big deal about the soil? Right? And all the nations talk about this. We have these weird things that we do that pop up in all of our religious behaviors. Right? So if we don't want to be buried in Eretz Yisrael, we want to be buried from the dirt of Eretz, with Eretz Yisrael. We'll try to bring some dirt over from Eretz Yisrael and put it in the grave so we get some kind of thing with the soil going on. It's not a fundamental aspect of identity. It's what we started out with. It's what we're meant to be. And if we don't look at it that way, then we're losing major levels of our identity. And we're simply talking about how do I feel about God. And that's it. And the truth of the matter is, and this is not a very popular response, but the truth of the matter is that religion is out the door. It's on its way out. Hopefully not for us, right? And when I say that, I mean I hope that our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is strengthened and maintained. But if you look at the world, and you look at the level of religion on the world in terms of how it's faring in the world, it's not at its highest approval ratings at the moment. I can't have to, well, let me hear other people, but that's what I'm presenting to you. It's not at its highest approval ratings for good reason.
Just very quick. I don't want to hijack everything, but
No.
neither is
Don't
nationalism.
hijack.
Neither is nationalism.
Yes,
We
no,
can
I'm
talk about that
not
later,
talking about nationalism. I'm talking about identity. And I think that identity gets truncated. inappropriately. The further you will have sense of where it is that you've come from and who it is that you are, the more you have a sense of who you are. And that's true biologically. Forget about sense, true biologically. Your DNA is this. Your DNA is basically strands of memory. It's every protein that is on that strand of DNA that has worked in sequence in order to be able to produce some viable element of your biological existence has been selected for and retained. And it has been retained for eons. And it exists in every cell of your body. And so down to the coupling of the strands between mother and father that produced you, it is a strand of memory. And it's all that's there. It just remembers. It's whatever's been selected for and has worked and retained. So on a biological level, if nothing else, every cell of your body is a storehouse of history. And it is literally what it is that you are on a biological level. So it's not really different on any other level of our identity. And so Tisha B'Av brings us to that consciousness. Tisha B'Av brings us to an awareness that the slice of reality that I might be living in right now is not the entirety of who I am, and it is not what I suffice with in terms of who I am. There's more to me. There's a greater aspect of my identity. Yeah.
I really like your point about the responsibility that you have when you look backwards, and my question is though is how do we learn to see ourselves as, I mean, we don't have much of a connection to Syria. I mean, when people ask me, I say I'm a Syrian Jew, I can't tell them, you know, 5 facts off the top of my head.
There's no Syria left anymore.
So I guess the question is how do we learn to see ourselves as part of a larger Jewish global community, to speak across cultural and religious boundaries?
Phenomenal question. We start by not just worrying about Syria. In other words, we start by saying, okay, I see another Jew, which means that they're part of my family. Whether I relate to that aspect of my family or not, I make efforts to be able to relate. And I learn from them. And I hear from them, from their perspectives, because it opens me. It really allows for me to be able to understand myself more. And it allows for me also to be able to get to the key elements, because there are things that you will share with that person. And the things that you share with that person, more often than not, are core issues. Because if they are shared across communities and they are shared across different tribal aspects of who we are, then they're very much fundamental about the nature of our identity. So it helps us tremendously to be able to get through and be able to reach out in those ways. It's the first step of doing it. Yeah. But it's also a question of looking at history. So that when I think about myself, do I only think about myself as a Jewish person? Or can I begin to think about myself as Israel? What does it mean to be a member of Israel as opposed to simply a Jewish person? It's two completely different things. A Jewish person is ethnic. A member of Israel is national. Completely different aspect of identity. And so to think about, what does that mean? What if I do think about myself as a member of Israel? What if I do relate to Eretz Israel as a place that I not only should care about, but belong? Have belonged. No matter how far I dig down there, I keep finding my stuff. No matter how much people want to negate it, the reality is that it's there. What does that mean to me in terms of my consciousness, how I live my everyday life? Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
I think you said it before when you said how Dr. Herzl tried to create a Jewish state, but he had no connection to God or religion. So
I didn't say he had no connection to God. I said no connection to Torah.
To Torah. So no connection to Torah. So having said that, the fact that even now many Israelis aren't dati or religious or anything like that,
right.
And yet if we're traveling on vacation somewhere, you see an Israeli, you hear someone like speaking Hebrew, all of a sudden you're like, oh, what's up? You're friends with them.
Of course you are.
So I think it goes back to the fact that we do have that that land connection where I can be religious, you cannot be religious, but yet that connecting factor is the land.
But it's an interesting thing because it's when you're on a trip.
Or New York City, I mean that could work,
Yeah, but it depends. If you're with your people in New York, then not so much.
True.
No, it's an important point because it works for us when we're out of our place. Right? When I'm out of my place, then everybody's a goy. Right? And so if I hear some guy speaking Hebrew, he's my friend. The funny thing is that if you see a chussid also, you know, with a big black hat and stripe and everybody else, you might go to that guy first to ask him, hey, is there a kosher food? Right? He's your friend. He was never your friend here. Right? Never your friend here. You wouldn't even look at him when he was here. But for some reason on the plane, when he's trying to get his hat into the upper thing, he's the guy that you go to after he sits down, you know, quietly so people don't know you're talking to him. He's the guy that you relate to. He's the guy you relate to. When you're in Hong Kong, all of a sudden everybody's one big happy family. You know, and sitting there and everybody. But that's a major point, a very serious point, because it is true. And the only time that we don't necessarily feel that way is when we've got all of our like people around us and we have our you know, our security situation where I'm home with my people. But I don't necessarily feel that those people even have a place here per se. Won't even necessarily feel comfortable if they're coming to hang out, you know, maybe for a little bit, but not really for a long time. It's not where they belong. But when I'm out of my place and I now am stripped of my cultural context, I drop down to the more fundamental aspect of who I am, and that is a Jewish person, and ultimately a person that is a member of Israel. And that I relate to. I will relate to that person before I relate to the guy from Finland who's, you know, not, and so on. Now, it may be that I meet a girl from Finland, and that's suddenly very attractive, right? Maybe a girl meets a guy from Finland, and that's suddenly very attractive. There's a weird thing. I'm only bringing it up because if I'm talking about being out of my comfort zone, why are people afraid to be out of their comforts? There's danger, right? There's vulnerabilities. I use this as a pack. It's a very primal thing, right? You know, communities and peer groups and all of that stuff. It's a very human thing, and we try and we like these things. We build these things for ourselves socially because we run that way to protect. Because when you're alone, you're vulnerable. When you're in a pack, you're strong. And so you do what you need to do in order to be able to support the pack. And this is evolutionarily so, right? You will even risk yourself in order to be able to protect the pack because it ensures better promotion of your genes, because you share genes with the pack. And so therefore, even if you have to sacrifice yourself, you will, biologically, right? You'll have a pack of wolves. Sometimes a wolf will be sacrificed in order to be able to save the pack because the pack's got to move on and they've got a larger ratio of genes. We're programmed this way without thinking about it. So now I'm plucked out of my security group and exotic things become attractive to me. And exotic things become attractive to me because there's one thing that I'm missing in a pack and a security peer group. And that is other. Nuance, something new, something different, something that I'm not used to. So, you know, I bring this up often in talks, but if we look at things from an evolutionary perspective, the way that genes started to reproduce was by cloning. So the early single-celled organisms, the amoeba, the bacteria, right? How did they reproduce? They cloned their DNA and split. Cloned the DNA and split, cloned the DNA and split. And that's how really we develop as babies, right? After there's a, right? But that's how it started. And if the goal was to have full genetic reproduction, then it should have continued that way. You get 100% of the genes every time. But for some reason, it wasn't selected for. Instead, what happened is sexual reproduction took over, and that is how the vast majority of organisms reproduce. And that means that they stripped half of their genes, coupled their genes with alternate genes, other genes, alien genes. And that's how reproduction ended up manifesting. You think, well, why on earth? It doesn't seem to be very efficient if the goal is to be able to reproduce all of the DNA. So then reproduce 100% of the DNA. Why would you strip 50% of the DNA and couple it with foreign DNA? And that be the predominant way that reproduction happens in terms of genetics. Why? Because if I've got one gene that's not working, I'm doomed. There's no more openings. It's done. It's just reproduced over and over and over and over again. And so variation was introduced to a degree. So you can't reproduce with your sibling. The odds are not in your favor. It's too close. And you can't reproduce with a horse. It's too far. There's a range of reproduction that's permitted, or that ultimately works biologically. But there's a need for it because there's need for nuance. There's need for novelty. There's need for introduction of other ideas into what I keep having over and over again in my secure group. And so things become attractive, right? So there's danger when things become attractive, but there's a question of how it is that we deal with it. So does it mean that we stay home and never go out? Does it mean that we learn what being me means so that when I do go out, I understand how to interact? Big questions that we've been dealing with for a very long time. Nobody has one succinct answer to. Yeah.
What do you feel is more important, a connection to Torah or a connection to Israel as a nation?
I don't like to segment them, because when you do that, you get isolated components to a very whole and robust identity. So that's like saying, what's a more important aspect of you, right? Well, unfortunately, I don't know you well enough, Joe, but I will, hopefully. Right? So the question is what the things that you are talented at, the things that you like, the things that you study, the people that you have in your life. Which ones do you want to cut out?
Well, I certainly have priorities.
Yes, so you have priorities. That's true. You have priorities. And yes, we can have priorities in terms of those issues, in terms of land and in terms of Torah. Mm-hmm. The problem is that they were made to go together.
There's a balance.
So the Ramban Nachmani, for example, says, there's no such thing as a mitzvah in the Torah that's not a mitzvah tuliyah ba'aretz. That's not a mitzvah that's meant to be performed in the land. The land is the only thing that's promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. But the Torah is there to facilitate life on the land. So they're meant to be working in tandem. But there are times where we may need to choose one over the other. So what happened for 2,000 years, what the Hachamim said, look, we are losing the land. So do we lose Torah with the land? No, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to maintain as much Torah as possible in portable fashion in order to be able to maintain some sense of identity. So that was their choice. And they said Torah is more important in that case. Now we come back to the land and we say, okay, all I've got is my Torah. I have my Torah, I'm holding my Torah. I could care less about the land. No, there are people like that. There are people that hold very strongly about Torah and halakha and so on and so forth, but I'm not looking at the land. And little by little, now that we have it, there's real question not only as to whether they're right or wrong, but are they part of us or not? There's real feelings about that. I mean, there's a real feeling about it. If you have a Jewish person that rejects outright a recognition of Eretz Yisrael and a connection to Eretz Yisrael, we begin, as a nation, because the majority of us do, begin to look at them as though they're not even part of us anymore.
But
right,
then,
wrong, whatever it is.
But then what happens when the opposite happens? When you know somebody who rejects outright a connection to Torah, but is so involved, like a guy like Herzl.
Yeah.
Does the same thing happen?
I'll tell you why it's different. It's different because Torah depends on education. It depends on being taught. And unfortunately, the thing about education is if you're not taught appropriately, you're at a loss. So you don't have it. So Herzl wasn't educated. He was not taught Torah. Many people in our nation are not taught Torah. They're not taught. And even we who are taught, there's not misconceptions that everybody has about things. They're not things that I learned in Jewish day school that just don't fly, that were wrong, that were just out and out wrong. Yeah, there's problems like that. So that's a major part of the whole component, is that there's a great deal of misunderstanding. And so we can't attack people terribly for misunderstandings. We can try to educate people, but we can't kill people on misunderstanding. Harambam does this. He writes the 13 principles of Judaism, 13 principles. And he really, when he first writes them, he writes them in his Pirush Mishnah, which was the first book that he wrote. He was young. He was in his late 20s, early 30s. And he writes after the 13 principles, he says, and anybody who doesn't believe in these principles, or who holds, even questions one of these principles, they're not part of the people, and it's mitzvah to hate them, and to run after them and attack them. You're like, okay, settle down. You know? But what happens with him, by the time that he writes the Mishneh Torah, which he wrote much later in his life, he writes the concept of the Garim. He says, look, theoretically speaking, anybody who doesn't hold up these things are not really part of Israel. However, there are situations where people were not educated, and they don't know. And it's as though they were raised by foreign parents, right? So they never had access to things that we might have had access to. And because of that, it's a mitzvah to teach them and bring them back. Completely different dialogue. But what he's addressing over there, he wrote the Mishneh Torah for everyone in every place, and he realized that this is going to be read by, he wants people to use this as their doctrine, you know, as what it is that they are able to study. And so he puts that out very clearly. So that's what I would say about Torah. I think that we're in a very unfortunate state right now about Torah. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of limited scholarship. So it's hard to make those value judgments saying, okay, either Torah or this. Yeah, but when we talk about Torah, what do we have? Yeah.
Do you think that if we're trying to create this emphasis on a more national identity, that we need to maybe lessen our emphasis on a communal identity? Like, is it possible to get out there and develop this
Yes.
national identity when you're not really exposed?
I do think. Yeah, I do think. I think that it's not very difficult. That's a question of priority. It's a question of how prepared are you to identify that way as opposed to the other way. How prepared are you to identify as a member of Israel rather than a member of the Syrian community in Brooklyn? And what do you need to do in order to be able to orient yourself to that? If you wish to. If you don't wish to, then but if you wish to, that's a question of priority. What is the larger element of my identity? So when I say what I want to do for the community, that's wonderful, but what do you want to do for the community vis-a-vis or in connection to the Jewish people? And further than that, what do you want to do as a Jewish person in the world? Because if you're a nation, if you're a person on this earth, then you're living on earth with other human beings, which means you have to interact with other nations. That's a whole other mindset. So how do I interact with other nations on this earth? How do I interact as a national person, right, as a member of this country with the rest of the world? And that's what, I mean, if you think about it historically, it's what Shlomo HaMelech started to do. Because once he had his home secure, he reached out to everybody. He started having political marriages. I mean, that's how they did things in the time, but he was marrying kingdoms right and left in order to be able to integrate them into Israel and to have relationships with Israel and the outside world. They didn't have the United Nations yet. Not that it's very effective. Does that make sense?
So you're saying you do.
So I'm saying that when you travel, you don't have to make sure that you've got kibbeh waiting for you wherever you go, right? What I'm saying is, this should be my initial course. It should be circles, right? So I grew up here in Brooklyn as a Syrian Jew. What does that mean? And that means several things. The way that I look at the world, the way that I speak, the way that I think, it means certain things. Good. Now, how broad can I take that? When I'm not in the community, how do I react? How do I interact outside of it? Does it provide for me all that is necessary in order for me to engage with outside my community from this place? Am I limiting? Am I missing certain things? Is it holding me back in certain senses in terms of being able to fully engage in the way that I feel that I need to? Okay, so maybe is there some other layer of my identity? No, there is another layer of your identity. You're a Jewish person, not just a Syrian Jewish person, right? So you look at what does that mean? Where do I share with other Jewish people and how do I bring that out? Good. Then I think, okay, but that's also limited because a lot of Jewish people can't have, they refuse to engage. So now what? Well, there was another identity it's called Israel. What does that mean? How is it manifesting today? How does it relate to me? These are all your birthright. It's not just a philosophical idea. This is your birthright by who you are. This belongs, every layer belongs to you. It is rightfully yours, and you have every right to be able to live your life from that perspective. And it's only a more robust identity. Yeah. in its best form.
In its best form. What does it mean to be part of a nation? I understand.
What does it mean to be an American?
Born in America.
And therefore,
That's it.
that's it. Nothing more. Do you have a sense, I mean, of loyalty to being an American citizen? Do you have a sense of, do you identify at all with this country?
Yeah, you identify with it because you were born there, and because also you grew up in that country, and that also helped mold
Yes.
mold who you are.
Right.
So we're saying that's really what religion is about.
But what is religion? You have to think about our religion. Our religion started as an aspect of our nationhood. It was not something that just came about because we believed in God and wanted to create some type of God relationship. The relationship with God was one in terms of a nation on earth, not in terms of a religion. Look at it historically. Just look at it historically. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he hires Moshe Rabbeinu, what does he ask Moshe Rabbeinu to do? Give him a Torah? Take him out. Why? Because I have a land for them. That's what he's asked to do. He hints to it. He says to Moshe, goes, when you bring them out, ta'avduno ti ala ha'aretz. That's all he says. They'll serve me on this mountain. Nobody asks about it. Moshe Rabbeinu only becomes Rabbeinu after he takes them out of Egypt. First, he's Moshe the Goel. Then he becomes Rabbeinu, and that Rabbeinu aspect is something that is only there in order to be able to facilitate the living on the land with God. Right? In other words, the bond, the brit of Abraham and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a brit that is locked to land. Can you acknowledge that? Right? It's the craziest thing, but that's what it is. So the Torah is only a mechanism to allow us to be able to live on the land, which is why the Ramban Nachmani says that every mitzvah is mitzvah teluya ba'aretz, which means it's a nationalistic identity. That I look at the mitzvot as the law of the land, not just as some religious aspect of my life. It is diminished when all it is a religious aspect of my life. So when I ask you, what does it mean to be an American? It's not just that you were born in America. You identify as a member of this nation. When you get online at an airport, at customs, you choose your line based on what nation you belong to. And if you're not in the right country, you got to wait a long line. Why? You don't belong here. But when you come home, have you been away to another country? Even when you go to Israel, right? You come back here. You're an American citizen? Okay, so you go on the American citizen line? You have global entry? That's very good, global entry. So if you go through the American citizen line, you automatically recognize, I belong in this place. Not those guys. Those guys are online, all outdoor, and so on. So don't speak my language. I belong here. I walk through. I do an officer. Thank you very much. Stamp my American passport, a nice big eagle on the front of it. And I drive my big American car down to my American address. And I live in my American place. That's who we are, without even thinking about it. You identify that way. It's a massive aspect of how it is that you think about yourself. And if you want to think about how much you do think about that, move to another country, like me. And you will see what it means to be an American. Massive differences. The way that you think about the world, the way that you talk, the way that you relate to political situations, without even realizing that you do, you will. Because you will see how people think very, very differently. So being part of it, so I can live there for years, but I'm an American. I always identify myself as an American, unless I end up giving my citizenship or whatever, which I hope I never will. But when they sing God Save the Queen, right? God save our gracious Queen, God save our noble King, God save the Queen. I go to the land where my father died. I'm supposed to sing about the Queen for the rest of the song, and that's what happens. It's your mindset. It's your mindset. It's part of your identity. So nationhood is broader than your religion, because your religion is how do I act as a member of this nation. Yes, but that's an aspect. The nationhood is much broader, and it's what has escorted us throughout, and it's what has escorted us throughout history. It's the one aspect of our identity that's never changed. It's been waiting, lies and waiting for us, always. So coming back to Yisrael Israel. It's coming back. It's not coming to something new. It's what was meant from the very beginning. And the astonishing thing about it is that it actually come back. When they started that Medina, they should have called it Judea. We were Yehudim for 2,000 years. Why wouldn't they call it Yehuda? They called it Israel. And they returned to Israel. And you think about Am Israel, and you realize that we have come back to that 2,000 years later after having it dormant. It's unbelievable. So what Tisha B'Av is a day in where we hold that up throughout all of history and remember that that's what we're waiting for and we're looking for. So it's not completely done, and we have to think about what does it mean to be able to get it to that place, that we should have a revival of a Sanhedrin, to be able to respond to the questions again like they used to stop having to say, Hashiva